Hey fearsome friends. Revenge can come in many forms, whatever the situation renders. These are some short stories where revenge was necessary, justified, and completely satisfying. I hope you enjoy them. So first of all, I take no issue with anyone's religious beliefs, as long as they aren't harming others. I fully recognise that every belief system has its share of people who will aggressively try to force their beliefs on others, including atheism. So with that out of the way, here's the story. I grew up in a very religious family, but became an atheist in my college years. To this day, though, my family still tries everything they can to convert me back to Christianity. Every year for Christmas, they get me some religious book like The Purpose-Driven Life, or something by Joel Osteen. I have repeatedly asked them to please stop the thinly veiled attempts to force their religion on me, but for 10 years I have been ignored. So this year for Christmas, I bought my brother a copy of The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, my dad a copy of God Is Not Great by Christopher Hitchens, and my mother a copy of Good Without God by Greg M. Epstein. The looks on each of their faces as each gift was opened became one of increasing anger, when finally my dad spoke up and said, "What on earth would possess you to buy these blasphemous books for us?" You can imagine the look of dumbstruck realization on their faces when I in return asked, "So you don't like it when I try to force my beliefs on you then?" There was a kind of stunned silence in the room whilst they stared daggers at me, but I was prepared and brought out their real presence eventually. Hopefully lesson learned on their part, but I won't hold my breath. My ex and I had just broken up, and it had only been a day, but I knew for a fact that it was really and truly forever over. I was heartbroken. It had been my first serious relationship, and I was ridiculously sad about it. Now for some background, I like glitter. It's a whole thing of mine. I know some people think it's the herpes of the craft world, and they're honestly not wrong, but I still don't give a crap. Glitter is amazing. It makes the world shiny, and I almost always have some on me. During our whole relationship, I had had this habit of putting a single speck of glitter on him and his possessions, his wallet, an Xbox controller, etc., and he would always find it, and it was a cutesy little thing that we did. Anyway, after the breakup, sad me thought to my dumb self that what a great idea it would be if after he comes to get his stuff and takes it home, that there would be tiny speckles of glitter here and there and everywhere. He would find them, and it would of course remind him of me, of us, how shiny we were, and he would come running right back to me, right? Or at least be appropriately sad like I was. I was dumb, I know. But it's okay, because apparently I have some sort of jaded old maid for a guardian angel. And when I opened up his toolbox, ostensibly to place a speck or two of glitter on just a few tools, somehow my hand slipped and I accidentally spilt the entire vial of very fine gold glitter all over his greasy tools inside. There wasn't even any glitter on the floor. It was just all in the box. There was no saving it, and I knew immediately that just like our relationship, it was done. Over. That glitter was there to stay. I closed the toolbox, left the room, and he came to get his stuff 2 days later. We haven't spoken since. To this day I have absolutely no idea if he ever found the glitter, as I know he'd never once opened the toolbox in the 6 months we'd dated, so I have no idea how he might have reacted. I was 17 when my mum finally left my abusive, narcissistic, alcoholic dad. And before, during, and for a long time after the divorce, he did everything he could to hurt and humiliate us. We were showered with threats, lies, and Bible verses, and for a while we just endured it, because we were terrified of retaliation from him and any possible legal consequences during the divorce. But eventually I snapped. I don't remember specifically which incident was the catalyst for my choice, but it was an especially vicious one. I couldn't do anything which might make him look like a victim, or anything that might cause backlash to my family. So I stewed over it for a few days, when the perfect solution fell right into my lap. Now I play a game which has several types of currency, one of which can be purchased with real money, and is therefore the most valuable currency in the game. Being extremely poor after the divorce, he lied through his teeth about his income, and we couldn't afford to get him investigated. I would often take advantage of the various free offers to earn diamonds. You know the type. Watch this ad, earn free diamonds, and subscribe to that newsletter to earn free diamonds, etc. But I never did any of the subscriptions or free trials, as they require real personal information. On this particular day, I was looking through the various offers and noticed a sign-up for a free diabetes-friendly cookbook. I was going to just scroll past it, when suddenly I had a stroke of evil genius. Hey, he keeps saying we owe him for taking care of us for all those years. I should send him a present, I thought. I went and grabbed one of the letters he'd sent, which had his current address on it, and got to work. The sign-up form was long, and required all kinds of unnecessary personal info. I gave his name, age, birthday, race, home address, office address, home phone, cell phone, work phone, personal email, work email, and everything else it demanded. When finally at last, I hit the send button, then I sat there and laughed and cried, imagining his reaction when he received a diabetes-friendly cookbook. Hopefully he also got lots and lots of spam calls and mail. But I got 3,500 diamonds out of it. Just to clarify, I didn't enter any information that isn't already publicly available. He has his own business and regularly distributes his business card to anyone who is even basically polite to him. He's an international expert on virtual meeting software like Zoom, and he's a fame whore. So although I am admittedly enjoying the thought of his email and phone number being inundated with messages, I would like to say that I almost went too far this time. I'm taking this as a lesson learned. Harmless isn't always harmless. I did tell Mum that if he connected the dots, to give him my phone number and I'll deal with the aftermath of what I did. I'm in my mid-20s now, so she shouldn't have to soak up his abuse on my behalf anymore. Also, I thought I should say that we're not in any physical danger from him. He's a master at mind games and manipulation, and calculates his bullshit episodes to cause the most damage at the worst possible times. Frankly, I'd personally prefer to be beaten senseless than to have to deal with his mind games. I was driving around knocking out some last-minute Christmas stuff last week and was getting ready to pull into a Target. Turning left across traffic from a dedicated turn lane, another car pulled up in the lane to my right, which wasn't a turn lane, then stopped and put his signal light on as though he wanted to turn into Target. No problem, except that he stopped in the middle of the street with traffic rapidly approaching behind him. I guessed a couple of cars hadn't seen him in time and rear-ended, resulting in a collision, trying to avoid his dumb ass. I pulled into the lot, as did he, whilst the other cars were now wrecked and limping off the road to exchange info. This guy had no idea what had just happened, and he pulled into the Target without a care in the world. He cruised around and found a spot, then got out, and I said, "Man, do you realise you've just caused an accident because you stopped in the middle of the street?" He looked at me dumbfounded and said, What?" Like he was completely stoned out of his mind or something. "You completely locked up traffic and caused a wreck, and now the police are on their way. I've got your license plate info, so I wouldn't go anywhere," I told him. "Oh, shit, man." He was just stammering away, and was obviously messed up. He looked panicked, over toward the street where it had happened, and the cars had since left. Maybe the damage was minimal, but who knows? He was freaking out now. "Yeah, dude, you probably better stay put, or they're gonna nail your ass for leaving the scene." Of course I had no idea if the police were actually called or not, nor did I really care, But this guy was 1, a total dumbass, and 2, likely high or otherwise impaired and needed to have his evening speed bumped a bit. I parked on the other side of the lot, walked into the store, killed about an hour and a half checking stuff off my kids' list. When I walked out, the dipshit was still there, pacing back and forth, looking over near the road like he was expecting a SWAT van to roll up at any moment. I drove past him on the way out, rolled down my window, and he saw me and said, "Dude, did you say the cops were coming? I haven't seen anyone yet. I'm freaking out, man." "Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're on their way, bud. You probably better hold tight." Then I drove off. Stupid asshole is probably still pacing around the parking lot, melting down. I used to work as a CVS pharmacy technician, and at the time I was studying for board exams to get into residency. I graduated medical school abroad and needed to pass these exams to get into residency to practice medicine in the US. Last year, because of COVID, my last board exam was postponed 1 week before taking it, then was rescheduled 2 weeks later. It was the only time slot available that would let me apply to residency within the time limit. But the problem was that I couldn't find anyone to cover my pharmacy shift for the rescheduled date. I told my manager and she told me that it was my problem and I had to find someone myself. I was a part-time tech making less than what the job was worth, but it got me by, so I endured knowing it was only a temporary thing. Anyway, come exam time, I couldn't find a replacement, so I thought, screw it, and just missed my shift to do my exam. I got to work the next day and she fired me on the spot, even though other people she liked more had missed days all the time with no punishment. It was no issue though, because I managed to get into residency across the country and moved there with no regrets. She called me a few weeks ago and asked if I was interested in coming back to work. Apparently most of the techs they'd hired had quit 3 to 4 weeks into the job because of the horrible work environment, to do with customers and other staff. She had no idea that I'd moved to another part of the country, and I was about to say no, but the devil in me made me say sure. I asked for a higher salary, and she said she'll talk to her district manager and get back to me. A few days later she called and said that she'd pulled a bunch of favors and got me a $5 raise per hour. She sounded desperate, poor thing, but I told her to shove it, that I was in a residency and was living my dream whilst she was getting yelled at because the coupon for Kit Kat bars wasn't working. She began to yell at me, and I just hung up and laughed my arse off. I used to work for a supermarket delivering people's shopping, and 2 of my shifts fell into the evening. Both shifts were 7 p.m. to 11 p.m, and there were barely any deliveries between 10 p.m. and 11, if any at all. The manager of our department used to let us go at 10 p.m. unpaid, or you could hang around and do odd jobs like tidying up, etc. But then the new store manager showed up. What I can only assume was an attempt to stamp down some authority. Anyone who was back from their deliveries early was made to work in the main part of the supermarket. Now, a lot of the guys working on the evening deliveries were older gents on part-time, who were just waiting for retirement and didn't want to be out dealing with the general public. So I concocted a plan. It was a very simple plan. And that was, just don't get back to the store until 10:45. By the time all the van unloading was done, it was 11 and time to go. So most days there were about 10 drivers just sitting in vans for 1 to 2 hours getting paid to just sit on their arse. These vans did have cameras and such, but could not be accessed by anyone in the store, only by people out of the store if there was an accident, for insurance purposes. All of this of course pissed the store manager off, and on the evenings he was in, he'd wait and ask where we were when we got back, and we could basically say anything and he couldn't disprove it. One of my favourite encounters went like this. "Your van was due back at 9:45. Why are you back an hour late?" "Traffic," I said. "Where was this traffic?" he'd ask. "Can't remember. was the response. You expect me to believe you got stuck in traffic for an hour at 9 p.m. at night? Nope, I said, and walked off. This nonsense went on for about 3 months before he caved in, and we went back to the old system. Our department manager eventually told us that this was because the cost of our department went up by £2,000 a month in wages after we'd stopped going home early, and his boss wondered why. This happened to me a couple of days ago, when I had a non-urgent errand to do. I was driving along a narrow road with cars parked periodically on one side, which left only enough space for one car to drive at any one time, so cars going in opposite directions would have to wait until the other had passed. Another car was driving 30 meters or so ahead of me, and as they cleared a set of parked cars on my side of the road, I could see a car waiting to come the other way. At the same time that I drew level with the parked cars, the other driver decided they'd waited long enough and just started moving. So now we were driving head-on, and with self-preservation in mind, we both come to a stop around the middle of the narrowed section. There were no hard rules about who had priority, but I figured I had the moral high ground, as I was already moving when I'd entered the section. But the other driver obviously didn't agree, and now we were a couple of meters apart. He gestured that I should reverse the 10 meters or so to let him pass, to which I responded the same and pointed him back. This seemed to anger him, and he started vigorously pointing and mouthing something at me. I ignored him and pointed at him again to move back, so he inched closer to my car in response. But I was in no rush. I could sit there for a while and wait. However, in the spirit of human brotherhood, and because I am mostly a nice person, I decided that I would reverse into the gap. I'm only mostly nice, though, so I also decided to be petty about it. I sat for a minute longer and pointed him back to infuriate him some more and put some life lessons into practice. I've learned from being an internet user that the only thing more frustrating than no internet is slow internet, so I started reversing very, very, very slowly. I had plenty of space either side, and I have a reverse camera view, so there's no risk of actually hitting anything. I could see him in his car getting ever more frustrated, so I kept reversing inch by inch, and eventually reached the wide section. He crept forward as I moved back, so we were still quite close, and I could see him throwing his hands in the air in frustration. To continue my pettiness, I continued reversing in his lane needlessly for a few meters more, and so still preventing his progress, when before finally swinging my car to my side of the road and letting him pass. He came forward and I could see he'd wound his window down, presumably to have words with me. But I had no interest and my window was up anyway. I then realized that I have a Providence's favor, because by reversing the extra needless distance and him pulling up alongside, I have a clear path. So as soon as he came to a stop, I looked straight ahead and not in his direction, put my foot to the pedal and I zoomed off, leaving him with his window down in the cold weather, hopefully costing him a few extra pennies in fuel to heat his car. "30 years ago, I had a job at the post office working the night shift processing mail. I would sort it prior to it being delivered by the postman, and after a number of years I was promoted to team leader, who was the senior employee in charge of the facility at night. The delivery centre where I worked was in a separate location to the actual post office, and one night I answered the phone that rang about 3 a.m. It was a doctor who lived locally, and he was urgently waiting on a passport that had been sent out by registered post. He asked if I could look to see if it had arrived, as he was desperate to catch a plane later that morning, so it was essential. The registered mail was kept separate, so it wasn't a big deal, and I was happy to assist. He gave me his details and I went to check, and luckily for him it had arrived, so I returned to the phone to tell him. He asked me if he could come get it, and I told him yes, but that he would need to provide photo identification. I asked him if he knew the address, and he replied, "I've lived here 50 years, I know where the post office is," before promptly hanging up. I didn't get the chance to tell him that the post office and delivery centre were separate, so I figured he would just ring back when he realised his mistake. 4 hours later, the day's shift had arrived and we're all hard at work, when a man entered the building and asked to speak to the manager. My boss spoke to the man, who was yelling about his passport and how some incompetent moron had sent him on a wild goose chase. He said if he missed his plane, he was going to officially complain, and that we should be worried as he was a very important person. My boss came to me and asked what was going on, so I gave him a quick rundown of what had happened. I handed over the passport, and my manager dealt with the irate doctor. I was good friends with the manager, so nothing else was said, but unfortunately I had no closure. I don't like blowhards and don't tolerate being called an incompetent moron, especially when I am not at fault. And cue the petty revenge. I set about a one-man campaign to teach this person a lesson about insulting someone whose job it is to handle your mail before you get it. Each morning I would check the slot that contained his mail to see what was due to be delivered to him. In my country, we have a public health system whereby you can go see a doctor without paying, and the government reimburses the doctor. And these days it's all done electronically. But 30 years ago, the doctors were sent checks, in envelopes emblazoned with the healthcare provider's name and easy to distinguish. I would take his checks and drop them in the mailbags, being redirected to other offices, some in different states, and they would be kicked around the system, eventually being redelivered to us. He would eventually get his money in the end, but it would have messed with his cash flow. I did the same with birthday cards, personal letters, postcards, and occasionally bills, particularly final notices. As stated, he always eventually received everything, just often days or weeks later than expected. So I work in a big clothing store, and since this was the last week before Christmas, and our store is pretty big, I expected to have more people on shift to cover everything. But I was wrong. The amount of customers is double that time of year compared to normal weeks, so we were pretty understaffed. I was working in the changing rooms this day, and my job was to keep them clean, make sure that people were respecting the COVID guidance, and putting back the clothes left by the customers. There was a huge line and a lot of frustrated people, but I was doing a good job and the best I could. As I was minding my business and doing my work, a lady shouted to me from the last changing cubicle. "You there! Bring me a small for this skirt." I walked over to her and she told me that she had the perfect Christmas outfit in mind, but needed a small in the skirt she was trying on. I told her that I would bring it, but she'd need to be patient as I had a lot of work to do. 5 minutes later, as I was getting ready to go and get the skirt, she once again shouted, "Where is the skirt?" I once again walked over to her and politely told her that I was about to go and get it. "Oh, forget it. I'll get it myself," she said. "Looks like nobody does any work in this store." I again politely explained that my job wasn't to bring clothes to customers, but to take clothes from the changing room and put them back, and I was going beyond my duties in getting it for her in the first place. She said something about me being useless and went back to changing. At that point, I was really annoyed with her and her entitlement. So I went and took the only small left from that skirt in the entire store, and I booked it for myself. The store allows employees to do that during work hours, so it wasn't a problem. As I went back to the changing rooms, I saw the lady hysterically searching for it. I'll put the skirt back right after Christmas. So this isn't my story, but my fiancé's from last night, and I want to post it because it had me rolling on the floor. Now, my fiancé is a server at a local brewery, And yesterday, a local church wanted to have a fundraiser there so that people would come in, buy food, and some of the money would go to the charity. The basic drill of how a fundraiser works. Well, one of the customers came in and ordered French onion soup. The restaurant offers soups in bread bowls if you want, but because of the fundraiser and how busy it was, they'd run out. Well, French onion soup lady really wanted that bread bowl, so my fiancé said, "I'm sorry, but we've just run out, but I can bring you a regular bowl and some bread on the side if you like." But obviously this wasn't good enough. She must have her bread bowl. "What are you going to do about it?" she asked. "I always get the bread bowl." My fiancé reiterated, "I can bring it out in a regular bowl and have bread on the side for you." But this wasn't good enough. However, there was nothing she could do about it, so she got the bowl. But she didn't get the bread because it's not a bowl. But whatever, moving on. My fiancé was called over again, only to be told by the lady that she always gets cheddar cheese on top of her soup. Something they definitely didn't offer because they don't have grated cheddar cheese. They literally have a block of cheddar that they hand chop. My fiancé said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that. Let me go take care of it." By this point, there were a few other things that had gone wrong with this lady's meal, like there were no straws or whatever stupid spoilt antics she could pull. Towards the end of the meal, my fiancé let the manager know that she had a table that might complain. But here's the story ahead of time. The manager, who was part of the fundraiser, decided to get revenge and walked up to the table the fussy lady was sat at and said, "Ma'am, I heard that there were some issues with your soup today. I'm so sorry to hear about it. But I wanted to let you know that because of the trouble, we removed it from your bill," and walked away. Now, the whole reason for her being there was to buy food so that the money would get donated to the charity. But because of her Karen attitude, the manager removed the soup from the bill, meaning she no longer donated to the charity, making her look bad in front of her church friends. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed my video. And if you did, could you please give me virtual hugs by subscribing and clicking that notifications button. I also have a Patreon page and YouTube channel membership if you'd like to support me further. Thank you again for being here. Keep being creepy.